And I'm just curious, do you have a general philosophy when it comes to sleep training and getting kids to sleep through the night?
Yes and no. Basically, it all goes down to sleep as a skill. And so, just like a child learning to talk, learning to walk, sleep is something that you have to teach them. That's what I didn't know. That was my big aha moment. And how you teach each child is different. There's different methods out there. There's things that work well for some, don't work well for others. And so we really customize it based on the baby and equally as important, what the parent is comfortable with. But all of it boils down to teaching your child to learn to go from point A awake to point B asleep completely on their own.
And I like your philosophy about not making parents feel bad about the choices that they make. I think that is really important because I do feel like what works for one family may not work for another. So, for sleep training, for example, so many parents are so frazzled. They're not sure what to think about sleep training. I think they're often leaning towards doing it, but they've heard from other parents that it's going to be really harmful for their baby, which of course I don't think is true. And I just appreciate that you talk about not making other families feel bad for their choices.
Yeah, absolutely. Sleep training gets a really bad rap, and there's not any research that proves that it's deserving of that. In fact, the research around sleep and around attachment and sleep is really interesting. There's not a lot about it. It's still in the works, but more and more is coming. And ultimately, if you look at, there's probably a dozen studies that we've looked at really extensively. What it all comes down to is maternal mental health. And when it comes to your child's attachment, the research shows that you have to be okay for your child to be okay. And so here's the deal. I'm not going to go out there and say, you have to sleep train. Your child isn't going to develop well if you're not sleep training, because the research doesn't prove that that's true. What the research shows, though, is if you are suffering and you are barely surviving and not making it, and maybe in the throes of some postpartum depression or anxiety, then that's when it might be time to look at what kind of change do you need. And teaching your child to sleep well so that they can thrive and you can thrive is an option that's out there.
Absolutely. And I think so often there's this fear that you're going to mess up your kid in the future. And I
Right.
like to think about the here and now. How can we make our life today better? How can we make our family dynamic better right now? And I think if it takes sleep training and that is what works to make your family thrive and get rest, then so be it. And I agree with you that the research is really murky or really absent about sleep training being harmful. What I've read is there's a study that gets often quoted from Romania in an orphanage that kids that didn't sleep well and weren't attended to came out with some attachment issues. But most families that I meet, to be honest, this is not a comparable relationship. We are there for our kids. We're there the next day. We're going to tend to them throughout their lives. And so if it takes a few days to teach them that skill and it works for the family, then I do support it.
Absolutely. And there's a really cool, it's the biggest longitudinal study to date. I think it's about 6 years where they followed children who went through sleep training and children who didn't, and what their attachment looks like 6 years later. And they're showing no different, that it's secure. It's a secure attachment. And so I agree. I think also a lot of people hear sleep training and they think putting my baby in their room, letting them cry, closing the door, and walking away. And that's not what it is. In fact, what we do at Sleepwise, the crying component, or what you do during the crying, is probably one of the smallest things that we do. You need to look at routine and schedule and quality awake time and nutrition, right? All of those impact sleep, and it's really important.
I agree with you. I think sleep training has gotten a really bad rep. And not to say that it's for everybody. If some families really feel like it's not for them, I wholly support that. But for families that are listening and they're interested, explain why it's not just closing the door and letting your child cry. Where are we getting it wrong in that explanation?
I think that that's in the people who are anti-sleep training and wanting to be very vocal about it, or spreading those messages on social media. And really, it goes back to that journey to sleep. And so we all have a journey to sleep, right? How we get from point A awake to point B asleep. All human beings wake up 2 to 5 times every single night. And so when you're a little baby and you are reliant on nursing to fall asleep every time, or rocking or bouncing or any sort of thing that we call these sleep props to fall asleep, well, when you wake up naturally, as you are supposed to, 2 to 5 times a night, and you don't have that thing, that sleep prop to get you from point A awake to point B asleep, well, that's where you're going to need help. And that's where you're going to need your parent to come back in and give you that prop. And so what we are doing is working with the parents to give their kiddos the tools that they need to fall asleep. Now, how do babies and kids communicate? Well, through crying, right? My background way back when is in speech language pathology. And so I have a lot of education on communication and those needs. And so crying is a form of communication. But while it's okay to let, even when working with toddlers, right, you have to let them be frustrated a little bit, let them figure things out. It's similar with babies. You don't have to let them do it all on their own. You're there to help them. You're there to give them support until they're able to figure it out on their own.
I think this is the hard part, is that when kids cry, we want to help them. We either want to give them a pacifier or breastfeed them or bottle feed them or pick them up and soothe them. It's hard not to help provide a prop. So tell me, for young kids, what is your suggestion to get them away from needing us to assist them to get back to sleep?
It really goes to what you're doing before you're putting them in their bed. So it's looking at their schedule, and let's make sure that they're not overtired or undertired, right? Let's look at their age and the age appropriate wake times that they need. Let's give them a nice calming bedtime routine. You can set your kid up for failure accidentally, so to speak, by, let's say your bedtime routine is giving them a bath, and then they're falling asleep during nursing, getting really, really sleepy, maybe asleep, and then you go to put them into bed and their eyes pop open. We've all had it happen, and they're awake. Well, to the baby, they just had a little bit of a nap, so they're going to cry a lot harder and a lot longer when you put them down. So to get them to sleep well, to teach them those strategies, to get them from that point A to point B, it's about setting yourself up for success with those foundations.